Okay, so I'm very excited tonight to introduce Mark Langford as our speaker. Mark is from the San Antonio area, grew up there, and ran a photography business there for many years. He's had just about a lifelong interest, I think, in photography, as you can tell by the title of his talk. He received formal training in photography at the Brooks Institute in California. Had his commercial photography business for at least 30 years, I believe he told me, in San Antonio. Also has a number of his photographs published in a variety of books, many of which are about the San Antonio, Texas area. He now lives here in Pagosa, so we're very lucky to have him nearby now. And he also, in addition to doing photography, continuing to do photography, Mark has a second interest in weather. And he is a major part now of the official, unofficial Pagosa Springs Facebook weather page. And I believe he also still does a weather page for the South Central Texas area, the San Antonio region. So he's a very active guy in that respect too. Anyway, tonight Mark is going to tell us about some highlights of his career in photography, his, as he calls it, his lifelong field trip. So I'm going to turn over the hosting to Mark, and then he will be able to do his presentation. So I'm going to make you the host. And there you go.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it. And to do my weather thing, this is what I'm posting tonight. No surprise. No, it's great living up here. Had a wonderful career in San Antonio, but am now enjoying semi-retired life up in one of the most beautiful spots on the planet. And it's just it's a great place. And the reason I titled my PowerPoint what I did is that for a kid that was sort of almost ADHD, I chose the perfect profession, because almost any day I could be doing something like hanging out of a helicopter one day, photographing a billionaire the next day, going to the coast the next day, shooting an oil well, you name it. And it was great for my brain. And along the way, I got to meet a lot of great people and experienced a lot of behind the scenes of industries and other other things that most people would not have a chance to see. In some cases, they might not want to see, but anyway, so let's get the ball rolling. We'll kind of do what kind of brought me to where I'm at, and I'm going to go to my PowerPoint so you won't have to look at me anymore for a while. And by the way, what I love about Zoom meetings is if people don't like me, they can't throw tomatoes at me like they would in real life. So this is a nice little way to protect myself from having tomatoes thrown at me. So here we go, guys. Okay, so we have the title. So one thing about that was kind of interesting as I was growing up is my mom and I shared a lot of common hobbies and drives. And she was really very much a positive influence, whatever. Anyway, she influenced my life a lot, and she had a lot of energy, and we really got along well together. So she started taking pictures right after I was born, and she was using a Brownie camera, which it's a real shame those cameras went by the wayside and they went to Instamatic cameras, because as I go and scan a lot of mom's old images, they're really amazing. And so this is sort of the point in my parents' life when things had really gone bad. They went bankrupt. They, as you can see from the truck, It was an old, although I'd love to have that today. Um, Things were not going well, and here's my dad fixing a flat, my mom documenting it. But it's a great photo, and so she was good at that. Now, she also did what I consider very humorous photos of me growing up, and this is called, I guess, night after having a big party. This is me and my cousin hanging out in bed. She also liked to document me in my earlier years as a nude uh, disc jockey. And so that was my first. And then, when things went bad, she, had a way of keeping me in line, as documented actually by my dad. Got into politics as a young child, even though I may not have wanted to, but here we go. Considered a military career, didn't go that way. Now, this one is actually quite revealing of my love of snow. But for any of you who have lived in South Texas, loving snow and getting snow are two different things. This was actually one of the biggest snows of my life until 1985, when we had 15 inches in San Antonio, believe it or not. So again, my mom doing her wonderful, humorous documentaries of my dad and my sister having a cold one. They really weren't, but. And this is one of the strangest ones she ever, this is my grandmother, my sister, a good friend of mine, and me holding a large gun. It was a toy gun, but the image is kind of interesting. So another little direction I went, I raised tortoises because I'm a very allergic person, and dogs and cats make me sneeze and wheeze. So I got into having tortoises, and a local newspaper actually did a photo shoot of me in 1969. Here I am with one of my tortoises and my really happy sister. Now, this is one of the very first photographs I ever took. My parents bought a Polaroid, color Polaroid camera. And as you can see, one of the first things I learned by photographing my tortoise, her name is Curious, was that these kind of cameras don't focus really well at like about a foot. So that was one of my first things I learned is, you can't get the camera too close to the subject. But this is 1968, and this is my tortoise named Curious. Now, keep that in mind, because as we go through the show, you'll notice that she's still with me. So the first photos I started doing with my parents' Instamatic cameras, we would build forts as a kid and put army men in there, and then we would throw gasoline on it and photograph the fort burning. And this is actually a fort and things blowing up, firecrackers. So that was kind of my early part of photography. All right, so in 1972, my mom, just out of the blue, we were driving around doing some Christmas shopping, and she said, I think I'm going to buy an SLR. And I said, what is that? She goes, oh, it's a really cool camera that you can change lenses and this and that. And so we went over to what was called at the time Gulf Mart. It was sort of, I guess, a rival of Walmart at the time. And she bought an Argus Casina, and she purchased it. And within, I would say, a week or two after me reading the instruction manual, she saw the camera only a few times for the next year or two. So I went out and started, what I thought was so cool about this camera is that you could control the shutter speed. So my brain went, wow, this is cool. Let's photograph my dog running, my sister on her swing. And I know these seem like trivial things, but you're like, wow, this camera can do this kind of stuff. The girl that lived across the street from me. Now this is neat because this was shot on Kodachrome. And as you can see, the colors are still amazing after, this image was shot 73, maybe 72. So we're looking at an image that's almost 50 years old. And it just looks like you went out and shot it today. Again, trying to capture kids running. I even thought it was really cool I found something, of course, not online back at the time, but I remember reading something about how you can capture images off the TV screen. And of course, what would be my first image off the TV screen, but a weatherman. Then I started kind of going beyond that and trying to document really cool things. Shrimp boat that didn't quite make it down at the Texas coastline. Okay, so here we are, 1975, and here's my tortoise again, and a little bit better focus this time, and shot in black and white. It was around this time I converted one of my bathrooms into a dark room and started actually doing my own processing. So this photo of Curious was one of the first rolls of film I processed. And of course, as any of you, and I'm looking at the screen, and a lot of you have this kind of hair, which kind of tells me that probably quite a few of you started off doing black and white photography and maybe processing your own. Self-portrait with my first real camera that I purchased. It was a Minolta SRT 102, as documented really nicely on the screen. And this was taken in 1975. This is a neighbor from across the street. Her name was Dee Dee. And a little interesting story about her. She became an actress and married an actor, and his name is Tom Hillman. And he's done a lot of TV work. And they live in Florida and are doing quite nicely over there. My physics teacher. I kind of think this image might have helped me get at least a C in the class. And so as I got into high school, of course, I gravitated toward working on the newspaper and started photographing things for the newspaper. I was a co-sports editor at the time with this gentleman here in the middle, which I guess you can't see me pointing to, but we worked on the sports together. And I started, besides writing sports, I was noticing how bad the sports images or the photos were. And so I told my instructor, I said, man, these are really bad. And he got all upset with me because he kind of thought I was a little bit of a smart ass. And he said, okay, here. And he threw me some rolls of Tri-X and said, you go do a better job. So I went out and had a press pass, and I'd never photographed a football game. Oh, this is another shot from the newspaper, just some fun stuff. We'll get to that in a minute. So as I started taking pictures, I worked at my dad's cafeteria. He was a manager of the Luby's cafeteria in Texas, and they're unfortunately about to go bankrupt, but those were the good old days. And so I photographed people that worked back there, and that's where I was working. Okay, so now we get to the sports, even though this is baseball, but I took my lenses. I just recently purchased a telephoto lens and started experimenting with it. And it wasn't long that I was doing mainly photography for the newspaper as opposed to writing, although writing was fun. But they were pretty happy with my work. And this was one of my first pieces to be published in a kind of a national magazine. This was a high school bowler who I think bowled a 300. And so they featured her in some bowling magazine. And so I went and photographed her for the newspaper. Self-portrait, this is my dark room. I can't remember why I had two enlargers, but what the heck. And here I am in my dark room. Again, from some Kodachrome images of my dad. We used to go red snapper fishing, and if you've never eaten red snapper, you've missed something. They're fantastic. My uncle was a still life painter, documented him doing his painting. This is my good friend John, and we had a little fun with photography. So I'm in high school and taking pictures for the newspaper, but I had not taken a photo class. In my senior year, I only needed like about 2 or 3 credits to graduate. So I took a photography class, and I did it sort of like, I can't believe I'm going to take this class. What am I going to learn from this? I really went into it with a bad attitude. After a week, I changed my attitude and had incredible respect for my instructor, because it was there that I learned about composition, rule of thirds, leading lines. And it really brought me into a new world and a much more interesting and artistic world than I had been in. Because I was basically at that time doing what most amateurs do, putting the subject right in the middle of the frame and not really thinking about lighting and anything else. So these are some of my high school, what I call art images. And I loved, one of the nice things about being young, and especially back then when not many people had cameras, you could roam around and point the camera at people, and 9 times out of 10, they never, bothered you or anything. You try doing this today, especially when you get to be older, and they start looking at you like there's something wrong, and they say, or they may say, I'm going to call my lawyer. It was really a nice time to be able to just roam around and photograph people. So I did a lot of that. This was a foreman at a hunting ranch or hunting lease that we had. His name was Ignacio. And again, a few rolls of Photoclub here and there. And I just love Photoclub, as Paul Simon would say. Here I am when I got my first light meter and started trying to do some portraits. The real people looked a little bit better than this. So, oh, by the way, yeah, I used to have red hair. So in high school, I'm doing this, and the same instructor that threw me the rolls of film that one day said, hey, I've got a friend of mine in the newspaper business. He runs a weekly newspaper, and he's looking for a part-time photographer. And he asked me if I would consider doing it. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, love my dad, but working as a busboy at Luby's versus being a paid photographer, took me about 3 nanoseconds to make that decision. So I went to work for this weekly newspaper, and my senior year in high school, I did not go on one date, didn't go to my prom. It didn't bother me that much, but I was so busy photographing multiple high schools every night, football games, basketball games, you name it. So, I mean, I was like totally slammed with work along with my schoolwork, but it was a great way to start taking some really neat photos and to get a paycheck back then. I think I was getting like $400 a month, which in the mid 70s or late 70s wasn't bad for part-time work. So these are some of the images, some of my favorite images from that newspaper. It was called the Citizen News. And this was, of course, for some of you our age, this was like an early computer. This was a kid in a classroom working on his computer. This was a strange gentleman that had a pet lion. And I did get to learn by going and photographing about a year later that pet lions are only cute when they're like this. Otherwise, when they grow up, they're a little bit threatening. I did try my hand at family portraiture. This was a friend of our family, and did that, but then I soon afterwards said, I don't think I want to do this. This was the first professional model ever photographed. We were actually doing a story on her for this newspaper. So it was like, wow, this is cool. And this is my mom and a librarian. My mom was a principal and just happened to do a photo shoot of them doing something in the library. I'm not sure, it looks like they're really kind of making a mess, but that was from there. This was a tarot card reader, and her flashing me that one kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies, but she was fun to photograph. So while I was working for the newspaper, I started doing some apprenticeship with a photo illustrator or commercial photographer in San Antonio. And it was there that I started learning that, wow, there's this world where you go and you get paid quite a lot of money for like one photograph that's used in advertising. And so this was one of my first self-assignments that he gave me. And of course, Pearl was from San Antonio. And of course, now, if you go to San Antonio, there's a Pearl Beer is no longer there, but their campus, or where they were, has turned into a very successful shopping center. And in fact, my oldest daughter loves going there almost every week to go to the farmer's market and everything. But anyway, getting back, this was my first attempt at photo illustration. which led me to start looking for a college where I could specialize and become a commercial photographer. I'm going to pause for a minute and to see if there's any questions. I don't see any. So if you guys are cool, I'm going to just keep moving on. So this was the really terrible campus I had to go to school in Santa Barbara, California. This was the former summer home of Henry Ford II. And, you know, it's kind of hard to imagine that as any kind of home, let alone just the summer home. But this is where I went to school. And at this point, then I started really kind of honing my skills. The first class was actually all about art photography and leading lines and perspectives. And so I really started working at beefing up my portfolio in that. This was a trip to Los Angeles. Again, love having all the lines and the placement of the two subjects. So while I was in Los Angeles photographing, I don't know if you guys remember a show called Chips. Now this was, the gentleman that was the Chip star. Name escapes me at the moment, but anyway, he happened to pose for me while I was photographing. A homeless guy in downtown Santa Barbara. This was actually like an art store. And so he's kind of my guy at the end of the rainbow. This person is a hypnotist that I photographed. And as far as I remember, nothing happened during that photo shoot. So I love to just walk around. This was kind of a creepy place that had the keep out sign and then the mannequin in the backyard. And just a few different images that I started experimenting with my kind of art photography. Cat that wasn't very happy to see me. And another model that I photographed in Santa Barbara. And again, most of my early years in photography, I love black and white, and I still do today. I do convert some of my color digital images to black and white. And this was went to like a nursing home, and this gentleman was there. And this actually, I got a couple of awards for this photo of the older gentleman having a cigarette on the couch, but it was all just available lighting. This is my James Bond wannabe shot. I was roaming around one afternoon and found a large corrugated pipe for I guess a sewer or project they were working on. And a friend of mine's sister, actually, this was in San Antonio, and she posed for me for a series that I did with this pipe. This is one of my favorites, roaming around Santa Barbara. Love the no person and the dog. Photographer named Elliot Irwit was one that I was following a lot at the time, and I was trying to kind of get that kind of a feel to my work. So this, as students, you often were sort of models for other photographers, but this is also to show you guys that about 90% of what we shot at Brooks was with these just incredibly heavy and hard to move around 4x5 view cameras. And so most of the work, now my street work, I obviously had a twin lens reflex at the time that I shot those on, but most of our class work was all done with these just heavy cameras, and everything behind. If you've ever used a 4x5, it's backwards and upside down. And fortunately, I was in a very nice climate for shooting, because in San Antonio, when I came back and opened up my studio, I was still using this a lot of the time. And it was really fun when it's 95 degrees and you're throwing the dark cloth on top of your head. Okay, so I'm bringing this one up. A little quick story about Ansel Adams. I'm sure if you guys have heard of him. I guess it was my first few months of being at school, I was at a place where I was buying film. And this guy behind the counter was saying, "Hey, have you ever heard of Friends of Photographers?" And I said, "No, I have not." And he said, "Well, you ought to sign up for it." He gave me their like little form, because of course back then we had no internet. And so I filled it out. And the idea behind it is that there were a lot of great photographers who, if you became friends of photographers, they love to meet with students. And so I sent my little form in, and one afternoon I hear my phone ringing at my apartment, and there's this woman on the phone saying, "Is this Mark Langford?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, how would you like to meet with Ansel Adams next weekend?" And of course, I dropped the phone, I almost fainted, and I said, "No, I would never want to do that." And so, anyway, yes, obviously I did. And so, me and two friends of mine got in the car and we went up Highway 1 along California. Of course, that was the first time I'd ever been on a road where it looked like you could die at any given moment. And we drove up to his house in Monterey. And of course, being a great photographer, did I bring my camera in and did I document any of this? And the answer is, of course, no. Now, in today's world with these mobile phones, I probably would have done a selfie with him. So all I can do is tell you about the encounter. It was amazing. We walked up to his house, opened the door, and here's moon over Half Dome, about 20 feet by 30 feet. Well, maybe not quite that big, but it was at least, I would say, 8 feet by 12 feet to keep the format correct. And his house looked out over the bay, and it was just incredible. And we stayed there for about 2 hours. Mrs. Adams served us brownies, and we got to tour his dark room. And then the most exciting part of the evening was when Ansel walked over to his huge grand piano and told us the story that before he was a photographer, he was a classic pianist. And none of us had known that about him at the time. And he kind of cracked his knuckles and he said, "Look, I've got some arthritis, but do you mind if I play some Beethoven?" And we were just like, "Oh my God." So he sat down, played, I don't remember which Beethoven piece. And we were just like, our jaws were all over the floor. And he played piano as well as he photographed. And then he sat down and told us a couple little things. And one of the things he told us that still imprinted in my brain was that photography, art, music, everything is the same. It's all about composition. And composition is a series of numbers, and it's how you arrange things so that it's pleasing. And he said that applies to any art form. And I just thought that was just an incredible thing. So anyway, that's my little story of Ansel Adams. And of course, he signed my book, and there it is to Mark Langford. These are some other shots that I did while I was at school. We had to document, we had to do like a newspaper kind of a project, which from my background was really not a big issue. Because my degree was commercial photography, I took quite a few different things, and it was kind of fun. They had an AV class, which would be almost like a PowerPoint class now, where I had to photograph something for a presentation. I did portraiture, I did studio, and I even had one class in film, which I will discuss here in a couple of minutes. But these are some of the assignments we had. And what they would do is we'd only go to class for a couple days a week, and we would learn a few techniques, and then we would be given assignments, and then we had a week to come back and present them to the class and then be graded on them. We also took a few core classes, although I'd gone to UTSA for about 1.5 years to get most of my core classes out of the way, but we still had a few of those to get in. And these were, different assignments. This one was light to dark. I had a Snoopy at the time, liked putting him in there for shots. Another one of my Mark the model for a friend of ours who was doing a photo shoot. That was my Texan, a good old Texan kind of look. Anyway, some more photo illustrations. And of course, back then, everything is non-digital. We had to shoot transparency and black and whites. And at that point, I couldn't afford a Polaroid back. A Polaroid back allowed you to kind of preview your images before you actually snap the shutter. So I'm just using my handheld light meter and hoping for the best and doing some bracketing. And again, some more classroom shots. Hold on a minute, just taking a look at the time here. So here's some more. These were setups. And this was a shot I did. And this is when I started doing some special effect kind of work. And again, no Photoshop, no digital. Had to do this with 2 exposures. And I had a camera that allowed me to go and do multiple exposures on. So I made a small pinhole, photographed some football players doing that. And then I superimposed it over the lens. So this is all one shot, and I had no room for error. So that was one of my assignments. Went down to Death Valley, and as I was posing for a friend of mine, I happened to look off to my right and saw this shot, and I quickly grabbed my camera and got this shot. So while I was kind of being stupid, I almost missed out on a great photo. This is in Yosemite during one of our spring breaks. Did some mountain climbing. This was actually an AV thing that we did called the Climbers. And that's actually me climbing up about a 200-foot cliff. Just documentation. I used to do crazy things like that. This is part of our film class, and this was a claymation. And Andy will have some links that you can watch the actual film. This was called The Worm Family Goes to the Beach. And it's about a 1-minute claymation shot on Super 8. And it took like a month to do. In fact, anytime I watch anything with claymation, I'm like, I have no idea how anyone has the patience to do that. This was called End of an Era. And I was telling Andy earlier, this film, we shot this on 16 millimeter, and then we had to add sound to it. And it has laser beams. It's a kind of a Twilight Zones, sci-fi kind of a thing. And my friends just did an amazing job in it. And this particular film made it up 4 rungs to become a student. Made it up 2 out of the 4 rungs, excuse me. But it did get put into the Student Academy Award as a nominee. And then it made it, like I said, through 2 levels out of 4. So I was really happy. I still have a little thing that shows the little Oscar symbol. This was another little short film I did, AV called Herbert the Orange. This is an interesting one called Life in the YACC, and has to do with, these were young people that most of them have had trouble in high school, and they volunteered for the Forest Service and worked on trails, and I got to go out with them and do a presentation for them. The really interesting thing on this one was who did the narration. And there was, at our school, there was some little cards, business cards, and for people that could do voiceover. And this one came up, and I was like, I recognize this name somewhere. And so I called him up, and when he answered the phone, I said, yeah, I think I recognize this guy. So I pulled up to his mansion in Montecito, and here's this guy that's shorter than I am, and he comes up with this just booming voice. Hi, I'm Don Messick. I'm like, no, you're Johnny Quest, Dr. Quest. And he was like, yeah, and Boo Boo, and the Ranger, and Scooby-Doo, and Bam Bam, and Rashro. And it was like, whoa. So I got to go into his studio, and here's all these Hanna-Barbera characters that he's done. And he does my little narration for my AV. Didn't charge me anything. And at the very end, and I have to find the reel-to-reel tape somewhere, but I asked him if he would do something. And he had like a little talk between Boo Boo and the Ranger. And the Rangers, they're just like talking. And I was like, oh my God, Ansel Adams and Don Messick. I mean, wow. So part-time, I worked at what was called the Stainer Brands paint store. And it was there that I met my future wife, Jennifer, who is watching right now. And this was one of the first photos I did of her. And we met pretty close to when I graduated. This was my graduation announcement. I could have gone to work for the Onion if I hadn't have gone to work as a photographer. And this was a fake newspaper I did. It had a crossword puzzle, weather, all kinds of stuff. This was my graduation announcement. Oh, thank you. I saw over here, Eric Estrada. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Whoever came up with that. Barbara, thank you. Okay, she probably liked Eric Estrada is what I'm thinking. Yeah, she's shaking her head. So this was my graduation class. I think we had like about, I don't know, I could count it. It wasn't a lot, maybe 70 people or probably fewer than that. So I get out of college and it's 1980 and there's like no work. And, but I go back to San Antonio and just by chance, a commercial photographer had just left Xerox and they were in need of another commercial shooter. I'm looking at the time and I knew this was going to happen. I talk way too much, but my first job was working at a commercial photo studio. And one of the first jobs I got was this. And it was like, wow, this is rough. I'm really not going to like this. This was for a place called Trim and Swim. And they had the advertising in the back of the weekly TV guide kind of a thing in San Antonio. And that was one of my first professional assignments as a commercial photographer. Here I am. This is like September when it's like still 100 degrees in South Texas. And I've got my 4x5 and photographing something that would take me about 10 minutes with my digital camera now that took probably 2 hours in the heat back then. So this is where I learned about perspective control. I did a photo shoot for the Boy Scouts, used a telephoto lens, and it just doesn't look right. Okay. Love doing shapes and minute work, and this is when I started kind of doing that. But really enjoyed photo illustration. As you can see here, there's a Polaroid back that's in the 4x5. I can't point it out because I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but this was a job I was doing for a bowling ball company, and it was kind of like this sort of Dali feel of floating bowling balls for a Columbia bowling ball company. So this is the final bit of it. And again, this is before Photoshop. We used motor oil in there for this, and then we were like tossing dimes or whatever to try to get the splash. This was something I did for a local school district where my wife worked for most of her life. For a poster they did. One of our clients was La Quinta, and this was like a new La Quinta, which of course, if you look at it today, it's like a very old La Quinta. So one of the things I started experimenting with, and again, pre-Photoshop, is cutouts. I read an article about how you could, use real photos and make them look like, something's happening. And so I started experimenting with that. And before long, I'm actually doing quite a few of these for professional projects. This was the first one where we took a cutout of a truck and put it on a topographic map, a relief map, I guess. And so this was a job that we actually got paid for a company. This was the young Henry Cisneros, our mayor, photographed him back when we were both younger. And soon after, married that girl that was in the photo that you saw earlier. And of course, we had a camera wedding cake, which she still hasn't forgiven me for all these years, because she, I think, would have preferred a real wedding cake. But anyway, there it goes. This was another sort of a dare thing. My employer, Jimmy Zinkgraf, always wanted to have the cenotaph in San Antonio, which is right near the Alamo, wanted to have them combined, but he could never pull it off. And so I took my 4x5 and having remembered what I did back at Brooks with the football players and the lens, applied it to this and accomplished what he was not able to accomplish in like 30 or 40 years in his career, and did a combine of the cenotaph and the Alamo. This was for a brochure we did actually for our company. Went to Austin at UT campus in the communication department and had a model or a friend or whoever pose with their legs. And speaking of that, this was a really unusual photo shoot. This was like a paint company in San Antonio that had way too much money one year, and they hired all these models to come down, and we photographed models and scantily clad models along the Riverwalk. And we had quite a few crowds as I shot these. So it was one of my more unusual. This was the actual brochure it was used in. This was a shot I did there. And these were some other shots that I like this shot anyway. So again, some more advertising photos. Those really good looking Cadillacs from the early 80s. So I don't know if any of you remember a shoe company called Capa, but I was their first photographer. And this was one of the first shoots done for them. They lasted about, what, maybe 10, 15 years. I don't know if they're even still around, but I did. So quick thing of this one, I had to do photography at a big ball, and my tuxedo did not fit well. And so this kept happening. So we went ahead and documented it in the studio. I got to photograph Reagan. He had no idea that I was photographing him, but I was for a project. So again, photo illustrations, started doing all kinds of neat stuff with Mylar, and of course the old star filter. This was for ice cream company. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of these since I'm looking at the time and don't want to go way over. But did some experimenting, saw a yellow wall one day and said, wow, how about a model in a swimsuit with blue against the wall. This is my first studio. I left Zincgraff's in 1984 and opened up my own studio, mainly because my paychecks started getting far and few between. And I figured if I was going to have far and few between paychecks, I might as well open up my own studio. So this was my first studio. There's another Capa ad. This is David Bamberger, who owned Church's Chicken. They were one of my first clients on my own, and they got to fly around in his Learjet, and that was really cool. Started doing more minute work, enjoyed that. This is another poster for that school district, Northside School District. Started doing more food shoots. And again, this is all done with 4x5. This is all still the film days. So these would take hours to do. Worked for a company that made sunglasses. This was for a company called Lancer. They make the soft drink dispensers. They're still around, but we did something kind of moody with the model. This was for a company called Data Point. They were in San Antonio. They were a really big deal until IBM related or PC computers went generic, and they no longer could sell everything in one piece. But how many of us remember the old Amber screen? This again started doing more special effects. Pre-Photoshop. This is combining images using my 4x5 all on one, getting these from NASA, and then working with it. These are all little pricks in black. Again, enjoying the special effects, and so they led to Jennifer and I's Christmas card. And here's one of my first ones from my studio. Always having a little bit of a sense of humor. This is our Christmas with cutouts from I think it was like 92. So we had a lot of fun with that. One of my first Photoshop projects. So I got finished with the cutouts, and about a year or two later started doing Photoshop. And then in 1997 went full gun here with the Alamo and fireworks and everything. Quick little story about this. I don't know if you guys recognize the Judds. Got an assignment, a PR assignment, to photograph this contest for country western people, George Strait. And then there was this guy who entered the contest, and I just thought he was amazing. He played, guitar, harmonica, drums, everything. And I was like, man, you got to win this contest. I went over and told him afterward. And of course, me telling anyone that you should win a contest means they didn't win the contest. So I said, look, I want to have a studio party. I said, can you give me your card? And I'm going to call you and have you play at my studio. Well, I called him, and it turns out he lived in Houston. And I said, well, what would you charge to come to my studio in San Antonio and play? He goes, oh, man, I'll do it for $200. And I said, man, that's a great deal. And then I got really busy, and I never hired him. And I don't know if any of you guys know, but this is Clint Black. And for like the 80s and 90s, he was like untouchable. And I could have had him play at my studio for $200. Yeah, so I did some work. This was for a company called Handy Dan. and they were like before Home Depot. And so this is a Spurs player and not Tim Duncan. Anyway, the Coyote. It'll hit me afterward. So more computer shots. I love the floppies. This image, just throw it in there because this was the warmest I ever photographed. We were up on top of a hangar. It was 108 degrees, and I almost died doing this photo. More men at work. And I obviously was up with, this is pre-drone age, so I was up in a bucket truck that went even higher than his bucket truck did. Love sparks and welders. More photo illustrations. I like to use dominoes. And now this one was interesting. Again, pre-Photoshop. These are cutouts, levitating, laser beam that I put in there. And this shot probably, I think, took me close to 2 days to do. This was a announcement for a Super Bowl party. And this was my studio was on Reindeer Trail. Anyway, started doing work for a golf club manufacturer. And again, these shots, they look easy, but I mean, this one, was easily half a day to a full day to do this one shot. These are all done with 4x5s. Brochure, one of my first brochures I did. My dad opened up he left Luby's, retired, and he opened up a seafood place in Kerrville, Texas, if you ever get up there, but it didn't last too long. You realize that was not a fun way to do retirement. If any of you ever listened to kind of this, it's hard to describe exactly what it is, but it's kind of a Spanish Nouveau, whatever. Sergio Lara was one of the first album covers I did. This was a product called Twang. I think they still make it. This was for that company. This was a special effects. I actually shot this upside down. We broke out the bottom of the champagne bottle and poured champagne in the bottom of it. And the cork is actually wired around so you can't see the wire, but that's how we accomplished that. I did painting with light, so it's kind of fun. So I would set up the camera, shoot the shot, the model had to be really still, and I'd get back in the back and do my painting with light effect. And for some reason, this shot came in here twice. So just in case you didn't see it the first time, you get to see it again. So I moved my studio to downtown, and this was my little announcement. And this was the studio downtown. And I'm just going to go through here because I know we are getting a little short on time. But these are some of the things. Worked for Dillard's for a while doing their photo illustrations. And more. So then more of my people. Bed company in town. David Robinson, basketball player for the Spurs. And then one of my, trying to block Nerf ball with David Robinson. So that was, yeah, I think my face came up to like his belt buckle. I've never been around anybody so tall. So here we are around 2000. Jennifer brings home a digital camera from her library. And I always, at the time, I couldn't afford any digital cameras because the real professional ones were like $50,000. She brought one home, and I ended up doing some research and found one for about $1,500. And my digital career started. The first photo shoot I did was of these kind of auto parts. It like more than paid for the camera. Worked for a company called H-E-B Grocery Store, which is big in Texas, and for a while had doing a lot of their inserts. This was a toy project, and of course, that's me being evil in the background, but it was a lot of fun. This shot, a real quick story about it. While I shot this rotisserie flaming shot, I had 104 temperature because I got the flu from my darling little children who got it in elementary school and said, "Hey, Dad, have the flu." So I was running 104 temperature while shooting this, and I'll never forget it because of that. I did some work for, this was a joint project between Pace and Subway. and experimenting with some outdoor shots. So I love doing food photography. We'll go through my food photography fairly quickly here. It's just really neat to do, and lighting is so critical. And of course, the most critical thing is having an amazing food stylist that makes it look great. And I had several that I work with. This is an interesting company. They hired me to shoot their fried fish. It was terrible. I ate a little bit of it and just thought it was horrible. And there were rumors around that this company was actually a drug cartel money laundering operation, that it didn't matter if the food was terrible. I don't know if that's true. This was like throw everything into one shot. Toy soldier. And one of my daughters is watching in right now. This is one of her starring roles in the insert for HEB. This was a project that I did for United Way, documenting all the different types of people that they've helped. Photographed Sandra Day O'Connor when Northside School District named a high school after her. Got to photograph a little selfie there. Got to go down to the coast shooting shrimp boats. That's where I learned that Dramamine is a really neat thing to take along when you're on shrimp boats in the Gulf. Meanwhile, during that time, a phone cloud formed about a mile from our house. So I documented that. And here's that shot again for some strange reason. So I did a lot of work for hospitals. So here's some of those images. And they were a good client. This one has a little funny story because the guy that was supposed to play the husband to this wife, or the woman that's having the baby, didn't show up. And so I ended up playing the husband. And this shot ended up becoming part of a brochure that went to where my wife works for their healthcare plan. And everybody was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is like Mark with somebody else. So anyway, it was kind of fun. So again, this was done, this child had some major heart issues. So we were trying to do something showing him at play. This person had some major health issues. And quick story about this, Oklahoma City was doing a photo shoot for a bank and went out to look at the memorial. And this was not too much after when the bombing had occurred, and happened to be there during a thunderstorm. Love the shot with the memorial in the thunderstorm. Did a lot of speed linking for a company called Natural Bridge Caverns, and trying to do photo shoots in a cave is really not much fun. They're like really humid and water drops all over you. But here I am doing some of my cave stuff, and actually in a boat in a cave. This was kind of cool. To get to this assignment, you had to drive in the river, which goes against anything intuitive in your brain to think that you should be driving in a river. Helicopter shoot down in South Padre. Photo shoot of a gentleman that restored old vehicles. He liked my work so much that he paid me to set up a studio at his place, and then he started doing his own photography. He actually did a good job. Interior of a plane that I'll never own. And just showing you some of my architectural work. Did work for some architects as well as people that make apartments. And HEB again, this is up in Midland. And what you don't see is actually this is in Odessa. About 50 feet off to the right is a pump jack in the parking lot. Good old oil industry. And of course, everybody needs a Texas-shaped swimming pool, because you really can't live in Texas unless you've got a Texas-shaped swimming pool. Real quick thing about this one, when I did the day shoot on this, I'm up on another building on the very top of it. And what you don't know is on some of these buildings, it's only about a foot little curb thing they put around there. And the day I shot the day version of this, the winds were gusting 50, and I was a little concerned about being blown off the top of the building. Some of these night shots I did, we actually set up strobes and would add some light to them. Go through here, microscopes, engines. This was kind of a fun shoot. Company approached me, they wanted to do this shot. I couldn't find anyone that would allow me to let me shoot in their bathrooms because they thought I was really weird. I finally found one at our HOA clubhouse. And after doing this shoot, everyone in my neighborhood thought I was really weird. This is how they used it. People eating yogurt, the happy family. This was really interesting. This company made very expensive, lifelike kind of dummies that they use for medics. And so we shot that, and it looks kind of lifelike. This is Kathleen, my youngest daughter, who's watching right now at White Sands, levitating. Okay, so I started getting into Photoshop, doing some special effects. This was for a company, and they did kind of goofy work, stereo company. And of course, I love doing goofy work, so played right into it. Nursing care, love doing people at their jobs, environmental portraits. One of my favorite studio shots, gentleman was a true jazz musician, and I don't have his name at the moment, but he was great to work with. Did some clothing shots for a country western garb. Looking at the time, how am I doing, Andy? Can I go a little longer or? Okay, you're muted, so I can't hear you, but. Okay, all right, we'll keep going along. Did a lot of group photography and learned different ways to do it. I ended up buying a stand that would take it up because I didn't like getting up on ladders at 20 feet high, and trying to carry ladders to jobs was really a pain. So I bought a stand that would go up to 20 feet, put a remote on it, could move the camera around and shoot remotely. So I started doing that. Of course, you have to have lawyers in the oil field, otherwise your portfolio is really not there. So this is lawyers in an oil field. This was a cool shot of a family. They had worked for HEB, that company I was telling you about, the grocery store. And this was a family kind of a portrait that they used for their advertising. And again, some more environmental portraits. Being an ex-redhead, I've got to bring in the redhead just because I have to. Photograph people out in the field, which is always really fun. I think it was about 98 degrees when we did this shot, and I really don't miss the heat. One of the reasons we moved up here is because heat and I really don't mix well. Onion farmer. And we were at a shoot, and we just had to throw the baby into the crops and photograph it, just because. Some more of this is, oh, I love this shot. This was done for a ranch that would like lease out the ranch, and these were the cowboys that worked there. This was a local attorney for a magazine cover. This guy, if you weren't muting, you'd be probably booing him. This is Red McCombs, one of the billionaires that I photographed. I think I've photographed 3 billionaires, and he's the one that wants to put the condos up at Wolf Creek. And everyone here, yeah, there we go. I was waiting on that. So I put this in there just for fun for you guys. But it's a nice shot. Tim Duncan and a whale. So that was interesting. Mariachi guy. This was for a bank, and this was their logo or their main mascot, the bee. And the actor that played their mascot was really an idiot, and I did not like him. His name was Alan, but we got the shots done anyway. I just kind of gritted my teeth because as soon as he walked in, he said, "Hey man, I can't work unless I have rap music the whole time." And I'm like, okay, I don't remember that in my contract. And so, yeah, we had rap music blaring the whole time we did the photo shoot. We had to keep Alan happy. Some more spurs. This was the last photo that I did with a 4x5. And my wife is going, yay, it's books, because she's a librarian, by the way. This was the Amazing Race, and these were two of the final contestants. And we went down to South Padre and I photographed them walking along the beach. They did not win, but they came in second, I think, on the show. And this is for one of the hospitals, the Fit Family. This is for a very wealthy ranch, photographing them getting out with their helicopter. I did find out that when oil prices went south, they ended up losing the ranch and had to sell it, and they probably had to sell a helicopter too. This was a project for a credit union in Houston, and this was dad giving daughter a new car. And this is family running around in Houston, biking. And again, with these shots, we've got stylists. This particular one ran about 5 days on location. We had flash, fill, all kinds of things going on that you don't see. And did another album cover for Sergio Lara. This was a ongoing project for one of the hospitals. They wanted black and whites of some of the different people that worked there, and they wanted them to capture them sort of like not static, but kind of looking off. This was right after Hurricane Katrina, a towboat bringing in one of the offshore rigs that had been damaged. A really cool shot I did for Getty Images. They hired me to go and photograph the installations of blades at a wind farm, and that was really neat. The only thing that was bad about it is that I had to spend 3 days there instead of one, because we had tornadoes almost every afternoon, and tornadoes and wind farms really don't mix well. I got to do my fun minute work shots. These things are really, really big. You don't realize it until you get there and you're like, wow. More minute work. I did a lot of work for oil and gas companies. And it looks like he's hosing off he's actually got a blower there and he's blowing the pipe because they're getting ready to weld it. These are guys working on a helicopter and down in Corpus, one of the Army helicopters. I can't remember the name of it, but it's one of those big ones. Oil field workers, rig at sunset, truck at sunset, pipe worker, man on pipe. Love those pipes. And another welder shot. One of my clients was San Antonio International Airport, so I got to go on the runway, and a couple of times it got to be a little chilling because we had guys with walkie-talkies going, oh, there's a plane about to land. You probably want to move your ladder and get off the runway. But I got some cool shots of planes taking off. And some more of my minute work shots. And one of my more recent welder shots. I love this one. It's just so darn sharp. At the airport, they would every 4 years do a fake emergency thing, and they would light fires and have people pretending to be dead and injured, and we went through a whole thing. So this is one of my favorite shots from that. That was like, yay, fire trucks and fire. More minute work. So Jennifer, who's listening right now, her niece, my fake niece, because I'm not blood related, was an Olympic swimmer. She got silver and several bronze, and I went up to Baltimore to photograph her just because I thought I should. And she trained with Michael Phelps, and so I did some cool swim shots of her. This was a apparatus to help you have a better golf swing. I don't know if it worked or not, but it was kind of fun. And we've seen that one before. Sorry about that. Went to San Francisco to do a photo shoot, look at the boat shots. And we saw that one again. Okay, so here's a more recent shot of Curious. This was taken just a couple of years ago. And she is now with my oldest daughter, who's also watching us right now. And she's taking care of her because Colorado and tortoises really don't mix as far as weather. She'd have to be inside a good portion of the year. But I've had her since 1968, and she's still going strong. And thank you, Aubrey, for taking care of her. Speaking of Aubrey, we went out in 2017 and I photographed the eclipse. And total eclipse, if you ever get a chance to go to one, the difference between a partial eclipse and a total eclipse is like, you can't even describe it. It's not even close. It's one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. More shots. This was using that big stand, shooting aircraft. This is how it came out in the evening. And we'll go quickly. These are some of the coffee table books I did and some of my favorite shots from the coffee table books. We have our parades. And this one still, I love the shots in our house. But these are just excerpts from all the books. And this, as you can see, is Columbia, which is very sad because that was the one that went down. But this was it being shuttled to they used to stop every once in a while in San Antonio, bringing it back. Dia de los Muertos, and cool shot. This was shot with a drone as opposed to a helicopter. And I started doing a lot of drone work. Again, more books. Our River Parade in San Antonio, Folk Life Parade, Lackland Air Force Base. If any of you are Air Force people, this is where you started. They call this the confidence course. I call it the evil, extreme, you will die course. But I actually, after photographing when I was younger, I was like, wow, that'd be fun to try. More excerpts from the book. This is a old, amazing theater in San Antonio called the Majestic Theater. And some dancers. Pretty hard to miss when you got these great colors. And some black and white images. And San Antonio has quite a few missions. I think it's 6. This is from one of them. And I got to do some more sports photography for the book. These are charros. And of course, you have to have the fajita woman. And of course, I had to plug my daughters. This was like my first book, and here they are at the kiddie park. And one of my favorite shots, the missions, black and white, done actually with a 4x5. And this was a more recent one done just a couple of years ago. And the zoo. And of course, the Spurs won back in whatever that was, way before when they still had a good team. And one of my storm photos that was used in the book. I love doing storm photography whenever I get a chance to. I'm sure if you know that I'm with Pagosa Weather, you'll be completely surprised that I would like to do storm photography. And I got to do some more sports work. When a cool shot happened to go inside one of the churches, and light happened to be at the right time. Really neat shot. And this is an early Riverwalk shot, probably done in the mid 80s. And fireworks without a digital camera. And lastly, where my work has been found, these are my images, and I'm proud to know that they appeared in a major hotel in San Antonio in the bathrooms. So very exciting, but they did pay me. They did pay me. I got actually a lot of money from this job. They appeared in bedrooms. And so anyway, there you have it. I noticed that most of you guys are still not asleep, so that's a good sign. I'll take that as a good sign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Are you taking controls now, Andy?
Or do I have to give it back to you? You keep it for now, and we'll see if anybody has any questions for you.
Sure. Oh, well, thank you. Wow. I'm seeing some positive chats. I appreciate it.
So one thing that
any specific questions?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about your Pagosa Weather Facebook page?
Sure. I'm enjoying it. I have one in South Texas, and then when I moved up here, I befriended Sean and Arlene and Todd. And weather has always been my second passion in life. And one of the things that is cool about it is in my profession, I probably had several clients that hired me just because of my weather knowledge, because when we did outside photo shoots, I could look at the models and say, oh, well, we need to avoid these days, or I need to arrive on this date. And especially we had that one in Houston. It was like 5 days with a huge crew. And my talents ended up being a real positive thing for doing that. And so unlike Sean and Arlene, I'm basically just stayed in the Holiday Inn Express and learned all the weather off the street. You know, when you've learned a lot about photography, you're like, okay, you get a little tired of that at night. So I started studying it just on my own. I have no degree, and nor do I pretend to have one. But it's been a lifelong hobby. And unlike in San Antonio, where I don't have people looking over my shoulder, I've got two like officially, you know, people that did this as a profession, and I'm looking over my shoulder up here. So I have to be really careful. Can't just say, oh yeah, I think it's going to do this. Like, oh no, Mark, you got to show the graphs and talk about it and all that. So it has been a little bit of pressure, but I like it. It keeps me on my toes, and I've learned a lot from them. And I like to consider myself sort of the light part of the page. But anyway, so hopefully around Thanksgiving, we will get some more snow. Check it out. Any other questions?
Mark, one thing that I noticed was that you had so much variety in your career, and a lot of those shoots that you did must have taken a tremendous amount of creativity to set up. You must have had to put a lot of thought into them.
Well, one of the things I like about doing the commercial shoots is you're working with ad agencies or graphic designers. So it's a team effort. And so you've got a lot of different things. I also used quite a few assistants. Most of these were not solo projects. And I have to thank all the assistants through the years that work with me, because they allowed me to be creative and work on my lighting. And they did all the grunt work and moving the lights and setting it up so that I could really work on the details. But yes, I never could have been like just a wedding photographer or a portrait photographer. And I'm not dissing that industry. I would have had probably a lot of extra money in my back pocket if I had gone that direction, because those shoots come up a lot more regular than these. But I could not just do one thing like that all the time. It would drive me bananas, which is why this field was perfect for me, because I could do such a wide variety.
That's great. Thanks again, Mark. I will reclaim
Thank you,
host
guys.
duties.